Another major Russian oligarch has gotten declared an extremist by Vladimir Putin and is having his assets seized. Just what does this mean for the state of Russia's oligarchs and the stability of Putin's inner circle? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is actually kind of wild because a Russian court has ordered the confiscation of a Russian billionaire named Denis Shchetenglov's assets. This is according to a Russian news outlet. They're actually seizing the KDV group after the court designated Denis and his father Nikolai as extremists. Now, this is unusual because it is a high-profile case of the Russian state seizing, again, we're using the word domestic assets via a court having previously nationalized a gold producer, grains trader, and a Moscow airport. But here's what's actually being seized. This isn't just like they're seizing a guy's mansion and his bank accounts. This is a billionaire. They're actually seizing the KDV Group, a major producer of snacks and confectionery. It owns 10 factories in Russia, producing 700 different products. It also, of course, vertically integrates, owning a supermarket chain with 1,300 stores. The total worth is around $1.4 billion. But here's the real takeaway. Shchetenkov lives in Australia. And I think this is actually pretty interesting. And speaking, by the way, of products, you guys might know that I am the owner of Strike Gum. I'm not a Russian billionaire oligarch, but Strike Gum still low-key slaps. It's got 90 milligrams of caffeine, 100 milligrams alpha GPC, and it's fall, which means that we have a 2-for-1 deal. There's not even a promo code. Just go to strikegum.com. You can order 2 of whatever. You can order 2 of the single packs, 2 of the 5-packs, or even 2 of the trays, and you'll get a third for free. So be sure to check it out at strikegum.com. Thanks to you guys, of course, that support the channel and want the energy drink alternative. Okay. So here's the actual report from Russian media. And I thought this was really interesting because, again, this was filed in a Moscow court, filed by the Prosecutor General's office. And the court ruled that the property belonging to Shchetenglov and his father Nikolai is now seized by the state. And here's what I want to show you guys what I thought was most interesting. This is an example, again, of sort of the Russian court system. I heard on another channel they called it rule by law, where the law is just a tool to sort of justify the supreme leader's will. And this is a great example of that, where clearly the Russian state said, we want to seize this business empire, right? Because, well, it says right here, it is state income. That is because the Russian state is broke. And with its oil revenues getting crushed, the Russian government needs to annex more and more companies in order to fund, right, to take the proceeds and profits and fund Russian military operations, or possibly reduce those profits in order to push down prices and fight inflation for the average Russian. Either one is going to be something that the Russian state desperately needs. Now, what I thought was most interesting is that the accusation was extremism. They say, the lawsuit says, that the income was made in Russia, but then transferred abroad, which, again, is not a crime. And that these funds supported the economies of the United States and Australia, which in turn have supplied weapons to Ukraine. This is a really sketchy argument to say, listen, you technically lived abroad and you technically paid taxes. No, you didn't even pay. They don't even accuse them of paying taxes. They say you broadly supported the economies of the United States and Australia, which in turn supplied weapons to Ukraine. So again, as much as Russia seethes and copes about sanctions on its citizens, they basically have sanctioned every Western country in reverse to say, if you contribute to Western economies in any way, you are going to get all of your assets seized forever. Now, the prosecutor's office said that Nikolai had been providing assistance to the Ukrainian side since 2014, and his son had been supplying Ukrainian formations with goods and foods, which isn't impossible. It's not impossible to say that Russian-made food isn't going to work its way into Ukraine one way or another. But again, is any of this criminal? No. In fact, Shchetengov's lawyer, again, Shchetenkov lives in Australia, but the lawyer submitted written objections saying that his client never financed the armed forces of Ukraine, never made any hostile statements against Russia. Shchetenglov himself is under personal, in fact, this is hilarious. So Shchetenglov himself is actually under personal sanctions by the president of Ukraine and is listed in a Ukrainian database as a person subject to immediate arrest, which excludes the possibility that he is a secret Ukrainian agent. The defense also pointed out that Shtangelov doesn't communicate with his father at all, a citizen of Ukraine, because of a conflict over money, and they have been locked in a legal dispute for at least a decade. And of course, KDV says, well, we've actually been investing only in Russia. So all of this seems like an airtight defense to be like, well, there's no evidence that I did any of these things. All I've done is live in Australia, right? And I think, though, this is an example of several things. First, the Russian state is getting desperate for money. And if you're a Russian oligarch and you see this happen, you're going to say, like, if you're, let's say, Roman Abramovich or another Russian oligarch with business interests in both the West and within Russia, you're looking and saying, hey, I think I'm going to be next. Two, you're going to say, listen, this guy really didn't have it coming. This guy, yeah, sure, he lived in Australia or whatever, but he never really supported the armed force of Ukraine. And the fact that the Ukrainians themselves say that he is a blatant anti-Ukrainian Russian oligarch is probably good evidence for it. And so they're all looking and saying, hey, am I next? Am I the next target of this? And that is like Vladimir Putin can't do too much of that because every time he does, all the other oligarchs get nervous, especially when you're looking at the Russian state stepping in, stripping him of his entire business fortune, right? I mean, billions of dollars just wiped off the map, transferred directly into the Kremlin's coffers. And like, you've got to understand that the more this happens, the tighter Putin's inner circle gets. Because remember, he also just lost an ally. And everyone who was sort of in his orbit, Sheltenkov's orbit, is also now no longer a Putin ally. They're a Putin liability. So this whole thing is part of a systematic shrinking of Putin's inner circle, an increasing paranoia, an increasing sort of grip on his, like a narrowing but tighter grip on the inner circle. Because remember, for the war to stop, the average Russian doesn't have the power to stop the war. Even if Putin is reviled by the average Russian, it still won't stop the war. It has to be done by those with real power within the Russian system. And those are the oligarchs and the Siloviki. And every time an oligarch gets pushed out a window, gets arrested and jailed, gets his billions seized, the other oligarchs are going to get a little more nervous. And you're going to see this is going to increase. This is going to increase before they get together and say, listen, this dude's out of control. His paranoia is through the roof. And we have to put a stop to this before we are next. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to our Colonel tier members, Michael Feig, Christine Schumann, Chris Holmes, Yanko Georgiev, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. Hit subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.